Hello everyone, and welcome to the Fictional Vortex. So we are back with an interesting movie on what if Naruto awakened the power of Kaguya, Shinigami, and Arc. Use Naruto x Cynthia x Kaguya, Pokémon x Naruto. But before we start, I just want to remind you to please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you enjoy my content. Let's start the story. Chapter 1. Echoes on the Bridge. The world had compressed into a shroud of gray mist and the scent of imminent death. For Naruto Uzumaki, time had become a thick, syrupy thing, each moment an eternity of chilling finality. Before him, the boy he considered his rival, his brother in all but blood, was a grotesque pincushion of glittering Senbon. Sasuke Uchiha, the last of his proud clan, hung Seuss. Pended in Haku's crystalline prison of ice, his body limp, his breath a ghost that had already departed. The faint, arrogant smirk that had so often graced Sasuke's lips was gone, replaced by the slack, K-jawed emptiness of a puppet with its strings cut. A single drop of crimson, impossibly bright against the monochrome canvas of the bridge, fell from Sasuke's lip and splattered onto the cold, unforgiving steel. The sound of it, a pathetic little plink, was the pebble that started an avalanche in Naruto's soul. A familiar, searing heat erupted in his gut. It was the rage of the Kyuubi, a wild, tamed inferno he had touched once before. Red, toxic chakra began to leak from his pores, steaming in the frigid air, painting the mist around him with the color of bloodlust. His nails thickened, his teeth sharpened, and a guttural snarl tore its way from his throat. Zabuza, standing a short distance away with his massive blade, watched with a predator's interest. Kakashi, his single eye wide with alarm, felt the oppressive, malevolent spike in chakra and knew he was too far, too late. This was the expected path. The Jinchuriki, broken by grief, would unleash the beast. Power would be met with power. Blood would be answered with blood. It was the simple, brutal arithmetic of the shinobi world. But then, something impossible happened. Just as the red chakra began to coalesce, to take the form of a demonic shroud, it vanished. It wasn't suppressed or forced back. It was silenced. An authority so absolute, so ancient and profound, simply extinguished the Kyuubi's rage as one might snuff out a candle flame. The seething red was consumed by a torrent of purest white light that erupted not from Naruto, but from the very concept of his existence. The air temperature plummeted, and the mist itself seemed to part. Not from wind, but out of sheer reverence. Naruto's world, once a narrow tunnel of grief and fury, shattered into an infinite kaleidoscope. His vision exploded. He was no longer looking at Haku through his own blue eyes. He was seeing him with a gaze that perceived not just form and color, but the very flow of life. He saw the intricate, beautiful network of Haku's chakra pathways. A river of pale blue energy flowing through the boy's body, more complex and delicate than any tapestry. He saw the precise, minute muscle contractions Haku was making to maintain his demonic ice mirrors. He saw the subtle fraying of chakra around Haku's heart, a testament to a life spent as a tool, a life devoid of its own purpose. It was a vision of profound, aching sadness, the sorrow of a mother gazing upon a lost child. This was the sight of Kaguya. His hearing dissolved into a new sense entirely. He no longer heard the clang of steel or the whisper of the wind. He felt the vibrations of the souls around him. Haku's soul was a shivering, fragile thing, a blue flame flickering in a gale, desperate for purpose, terrified of being extinguished. Zabuza's was a jagged shard of obsidian, scarred and weary, drenched in the blood of comrades and enemies alike, screaming with a silent, unending pain. Kakashi's soul was a complex knot of silver and black, loyalty and regret intertwined so tightly they were one and the same, forever circling the ghost of a lost friend. And in the cage within his own gut, Kurama's soul was not a monster's, but a vast, blazing sun of orange energy, shackled and resentful, yet possessed of an ancient, prideful loneliness. This was the perception of the Shinigami. His sense of touch expanded beyond his skin. He felt the molecular structure of the bridge beneath his feet, the precise arrangement of iron and carbon atoms. He understood the crystalline lattice of Haku's mirrors, the hydrogen and oxygen bonds holding them in their frozen state. He was aware of the air pressure, the humidity, the gravitational pull of the moon hidden behind the clouds. The world was no longer a collection of objects, but an intricate, interwoven tapestry of fundamental laws and physical properties, a grand design that could, with the right knowledge, be edited. This was the understanding of Arceus. Creation, life, death, three ultimate concepts, three distinct streams of cosmic knowledge, poured into the fragile vessel of a 12-year-old boy. The sheer volume of information should have vaporized his mind, shredded his consciousness into confetti. But he did not break. The vessel was reforged in the same instant it was filled. The Uzumaki bloodline, with its immense vitality and life force, became the perfect conduit. His mind expanded, his soul reinforcing itself, his very spiritual DNA being rewritten to accommodate the impossible trinity now residing within him. The snarl on his face smoothed into an expression of serene, unnerving calm. The feral crouch straightened into a relaxed, upright posture. His blue eyes, once burning with tears and rage, now held the depth of a star-filled cosmos. The change was so sudden, so absolute, it was more terrifying than any demonic transformation. Haku, seeing the rage vanish and this strange, new presence emerge, felt a primal tremor of fear. This was not the boy he had been fighting. He renewed his assault, his body flickering between the 21 mirrors, a phantom of lethal speed. Senbon needles, crafted from ice and honed to a razor's edge, flew from all directions, a torrent of guaranteed death. To the old Naruto, it would have been an inescapable storm. To the new Naruto, it was a slow, predictable pattern of intersecting lines. He didn't move to dodge. He simply lifted his right hand, palm open. He focused on a single concept delivered to him by the creative essence within, unmake. The nearest ice mirror, the one Haku was just emerging from, did not shatter. It did not melt. It simply ceased to be. The crystalline structure dissolved into a cloud of harmless, swirling water vapor. Haku, halfway through his transition, stumbled out into open air, his momentum carrying him onto the bridge in a clumsy sprawl. He stared, utterly bewildered, at the empty space where his mirror had been. There was no sound of breaking ice, no remnant shards, just a lingering cold spot in the air. He looked at his other mirrors. They were still there, shimmering, perfect. He had to be mistaken. He phased into another one, his speed a testament to his training. He would strike from behind. Naruto didn't even turn. He raised his left hand. Cease. This time, all 20 of the remaining mirrors dissolved simultaneously. The air filled with a dense, rolling fog of vaporized ice. The sudden loss of his technique's foundation sent Haku tumbling to the steel ground, his body racked with confusion and a terror so profound it left him breathless. His ultimate jutsu, his very identity as a weapon, had been deconstructed with a word and a gesture. It was like a painter watching his masterpiece be turned back into blank canvas by the will of a god. Zabuza's breath hitched. He had seen every jutsu the elemental nations had to offer. He had fought Kage and legendary ninja. He had never seen anything like this. It wasn't ninjutsu. It wasn't genjutsu. It was something else entirely. Kakashi's Sharingan spun wildly, trying to analyze the phenomenon. It saw no hand signs, no buildup of chakra, only a faint, shimmering golden aura around Naruto that radiated an authority that made the very air feel heavy. The chakra it perceived was not red, not blue, but a placid, terrifying river of pure white energy, deeper and vaster than any ocean. Naruto took a single, deliberate step forward. The sound of his sandal on the metal was the only noise in the sudden, deafening silence. He looked at the trembling Haku, and his eyes were filled not with anger, but with a deep, crushing pity. "You are more than the weapon he made you," Naruto said. His voice was different. It was still his, but it was layered with echoes, a soft, feminine cadence of ancient royalty, and a resonant, timeless hum that sounded like the universe itself. "Your soul is fractured. You bleed your life force into a purpose that is not your own. You believe your existence has meaning only as a tool for another." Haku flinched as if struck. The boy was reciting the deepest, most secret tenets of his heart. "That is a lie," Naruto continued, his voice gentle but absolute. "A tool can be broken. A tool can be replaced. A soul is unique. It is a light that, once extinguished, can never be relit in the same way. He taught you that your dream was to serve his dream. But a borrowed dream will always leave you empty." He took another step. Haku scrambled backward, crab walking away from the approaching enigma. This boy saw too much. He saw everything. Naruto turned his cosmic gaze from Haku to Zabuza. The demon of the mist instinctively tightened his grip on the Kubikiribocho, the executioner's blade. The massive weapon felt like a child's toy in his hands. Momochi Zabuza, Naruto said, the name flowing from his lips like a judge's verdict. You call yourself a demon to hide the scared boy from Kurigakure. The boy who was forced to kill his own classmates to graduate. You slaughtered 100 of your friends. And with each life you took, you carved a piece of your own soul away, believing it was strength. It was fear. Zabuza staggered back, his eyes wide with shock behind his bandages. How could you know that? I can feel the ghosts that haunt you, Naruto said, his expression unchanging. I feel the weight of their blood on your spirit. You wear your ambition like a shield, claiming to want to retake Mizu no Kuni to overthrow a corrupt regime. A noble goal, but it is a lie you tell yourself. The truth is you are running. Running from the memory of those children's faces. Running from the man who turned your village into a slaughterhouse. You fight and kill and strive for power, not to build a new world, but to silence the screams in your own mind. Every word was a perfectly aimed blade, slicing through Zabuza's defenses, past his reputation, past his hardened exterior, and striking directly at the broken child cowering within. Zabuza, a man who had faced armies without flinching, found his hands shaking. You use Haku as your perfect weapon, but you care for him, Naruto stated, not as an accusation, but as a simple fact. You found a kindred SP, Irid in a boy whose heart was as broken as your own. You gave him purpose, and in return, he gave you a reason to keep fighting. But you were leading him to his death. You were leading yourself to a meaningless end on a half-finished bridge. All for a greedy pig like Gato who will discard you the moment you are no longer useful. The final piece of Zabuza's composure cracked. This wasn't a child talking. It was a sage, a confessor, a being that had peeled back the layers of his life and laid his soul bare for all to see. Naruto stopped, now standing halfway between Zabuza and Haku. He looked from one to the other. Your path ends here. The cycle of you using him, and the world using you, is over. You have two choices. Lay down your blade and walk away from this life. Find a new purpose, or raise it against me, and I will show you what true emptiness feels like. The threat was delivered with no malice, no anger. It was a simple statement of cosmic reality, as immutable as gravity. For a long, agonizing minute, the bridge was silent save for the distant cry of a seagull. Zabuza's mind raced. Everything in his shinobi instinct screamed at him to fight, to kill this inexplicable threat. But the part of him that was still human, the part that remembered being a boy, was utterly, completely terrified. The being in front of him wasn't just powerful. It was true. With a rattling sigh hat sounded like stones grinding together, Zabuza's grip on his sword loosened. The tip of the massive blade lowered, scraping against the steel of the bridge with a mournful screech. He had made his decision. Naruto gave a single, slow nod of acknowledgement. He then turned his back on the two most feared mercenaries in the land of waves, an act of such supreme confidence it was breathtaking. He walked back towards the still form of his teammate. Kakashi finally found his voice, a strained, hoarse whisper. Naruto, what are you? Naruto didn't answer immediately. He knelt beside Sasuke, his expression softening as he looked down at the still face. The anger was gone, the grief was gone, replaced by a profound sense of responsibility. I am myself, he said quietly, his voice now sounding more like his own. Though the echoes remained, just more. He placed a hand on Sasuke's chest, right over his heart. There was no green glow of medical ninjutsu. There was no dramatic pulse of energy. There was only that soft, golden light, the aura of creation, enveloping his hand. From Naruto's new perspective, he could see the damage on a cellular level. He saw the torn muscle fibers, the pierced organs, the nerve endings screaming with phantom pain. He saw the life force, the personal chakra of Sasuke Uchiha, flickering like a dying ember, about to detach from its physical anchor. He didn't just pump chakra in. He began to instruct. He commanded the cells to regenerate, providing them with the perfect blueprint of their undamaged state. He persuaded the nerve endings to mend, soothing their frantic signals. He gently coaxed Sasuke's waning life force back into its vessel, reinforcing the connection between soul and body. It was an act of intimate, precise creation. On the outside, the effect was miraculous. The dozens of Senbon needles were slowly, smoothly pushed out of Sasuke's body by flesh that was knitting itself back together in real time. The blue-tinged lips regained their color. The wounds closed over, leaving not a single scar behind. Within 30 seconds, it was as if he had never been injured at all. A quiet, steady heartbeat began to thrum under Naruto's palm. A moment later, Sasuke's eyelids fluttered, and he took a sharp, gasping breath, his onyx eyes flying open in confusion. Naruto removed his hand and stood up. He looked towards the end of the bridge, where a new crowd was gathering. A short, arrogant man in a business suit, surrounded by 100 hired thugs and samurai, was approaching. Gato had arrived to clean house. The old Naruto would have yelled, made 1,000 shadow clones, and charged headfirst into a reckless battle. The new Naruto simply watched them approach, his face a mask of placid disinterest. The sun, as if on cue, finally broke through the thick bank of mist. A brilliant, golden ray of light speared down from the heavens and illuminated the spot where Naruto stood, casting him in a divine glow. The fog began to burn away, revealing the blue sky for the first time that day. He looked at the small army of mercenaries, then glanced back at the 2 broken shinobi behind him, and the 2 Jonin and the bridge builder, who were staring at him as if he were a ghost. His responsibility was clear. This was his stage now. This was the first day of his new existence. And he would begin it with an act of order. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Trinity Within. The walk back from the bridge was a journey through a world remade. Gato and his small army of thugs had been dealt with not through a storm of fists and shadow clones, but with a quiet, suffocating pressure. Naruto had simply looked at them, all 100 of them, and pushed. Not with his hands, but with his will. The mercenaries felt a sudden, inexplicable weight on their souls. A crushing gravity of the spirit that brought them to their knees. Their will to fight, their greed, their cruelty, it all evaporated under a pressure that felt like the judgment of heaven itself. They had fled, dropping their weapons, their minds filled with a primal terror they would never be able to explain. Now, silence reigned. It was a thick, heavy thing, broken only by the crunch of 4 sets of footsteps on the gravel path and the distant cry of gulls. Kakashi, his single visible eye a vortex of questions, kept darting glances at the small blonde boy walking serenely at the front of their formation. Sasuke, fully healed but deeply unsettled, stared at Naruto's back, his mind a maelstrom of confusion, bruised pride, and a terrifying new brand of respect. Sakura, walking beside him, seemed the most afraid of all. She kept a noticeable distance from Naruto, as if he were a bomb that might detonate at any moment. For Naruto, the journey was an ordeal of sensory overload. The new modes of perception that had erupted within him on the bridge had not receded. They were now his baseline reality. He could feel the vibrant life force of the trees lining the path, each one a slow, green, peaceful soul. He could perceive the network of mycelium under the earth, a silent, sprawling consciousness connecting the forest. He could feel the subtle shifts in the earth's magnetic field and see the polarized light of the afternoon sun. The world was a symphony of information so dense, so complex, that it was a struggle to focus on the simple act of walking. When they arrived back at Tezuna's small, wooden house, the bridge builder and his family greeted them with tears of joy and relief. Inari, the little boy who had seen Naruto as nothing but a loud-mouthed fool, now looked at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe, as if staring at a hero from a myth. They were ushered inside, and the familiar scent of old wood, brine, and cooking rice filled the air. Tsunami, Tezuna's daughter, quickly set about preparing tea, her hands trembling slightly. Everyone was seated around the low wooden table in the main room, the silence between them as thick as the lingering morning fog had been. Tsunami placed a cup of steaming green tea before Naruto. He looked down at it, and the universe within him provided its story. He saw the faint, shimmering residue of Tsunami's own life force on the ceramic, a mixture of anxiety and profound gratitude. He looked into the tea itself and perceived the lingering essence of the plant it came from, feeling its life sigh. Clee in a fleeting instant, a seed sprouting in a sun-drenched field, the rain on its leaves, the moment of its harvest. He understood the chemical composition of the liquid, the tannins and the caffeine. The way the hot water had agitated the molecules and released its flavor. He lifted the cup. The simple act felt monumental. He took a sip. The warmth spread through him, and for a moment, the overwhelming symphony of the world quieted. Brought into focus by this single, grounding sensation. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet and clear. The two words seemed to carry an unusual weight in the tense room. Tsunami simply nodded, unable to form a reply. Naruto closed his eyes, feigning weariness. He needed to retreat from the external world, to explore the new geography of his own soul. To understand what had happened to him, what he had become. He let his consciousness drift inward, past the physical, past the immediate, and into the nexus of his own mind. The foul, dripping sewer that had once been his mental landscape was gone. In its place was a space of impossible beauty and serene order. He stood on the shore of a perfectly still, black lake. The water was so dark it seemed to absorb all light. Yet it reflected a brilliant canopy of stars that was not the sky of his world, but the heart of the cosmos itself. Each star was a soul, he understood, and the lake was his connection to the fundamental laws that governed them. This was the domain of the Shinigami, a place of quiet, impartial truth. To his right, a single, colossal tree grew, its branches so vast they seemed to scratch the edges of the star-dusted sky. Its bark was pearlescent white, and its leaves shimmered with every color of the chakra spectrum. At the base of the tree, celestial-looking flowers bloomed and faded in a gentle, rhythmic pulse. The air here felt ancient, filled with a deep, maternal sorrow and an unimaginable wealth of knowledge about the very energy of life. This was the garden of Kaguya. To his left, a massive, crystalline structure floated silently above the ground. It was a complex, multifaceted geometry of pure light and logic, constantly shifting its form into new, elegant equations of being. It emitted a soft, harmonious hum that felt like the underlying source code of reality itself. From it flowed not emotion or memory, but pure, unadulterated understanding of the physical world. This was the monolith of Arceus. And before him, across a stretch of verdant grass, was the familiar, massive cage. The great red gate was still there, the paper seal still affixed to its center. But something was fundamentally different. The bars no longer radiated hatred and imprisonment. The seal, which he had once seen as a meaningless scrawl of ink, was now an equation of breathtaking elegance. He understood its every component, the way it bound a conceptual being to a physical host, the way it acted as a filter and a conduit. And he realized, with a clarity that was both startling and liberating, that the gate was not locked. It had never been truly locked. He had simply never known how to open it. A presence manifested beside him, not as a physical form, but as a feeling, a thought. A voice that spoke directly into his consciousness. It was feminine, regal, and steeped in a melancholy that felt as deep as the ages. "You see it now, child. The nature of the cage. The nature of the prisoner." Naruto turned his mind's eye toward the great tree. Kaguya, he thought, the name coming to him as naturally as his own. "I am a remnant, a shade, a regret given form," the voice of Kaguya replied. "My true self was a monster of ambition, twisted by fear and a lust for power. I consumed the fruit of the god tree and became the first vessel of chakra in this world, but in doing so, I became its first slave. This garden is the memory of what I lost. My son, Hagoromo, sealed me away, but a fragment of my will, my regret for what I had done to my children and my world, remained adrift in the river of souls. It clung to the chakra of my descendants, the Uzumaki. It slept within your mother, and now it has awakened in you." Naruto felt a wave of information wash over him. From the tree, the story of the Otsutsuki clan, celestial parasites who traveled from world to world, planting god trees to harvest the life energy of entire planets, leaving barren husks in their wake. He saw Kaguya's arrival, her fear of her kin, her desperate, tyrannical attempt to build an army to fight them, and her eventual descent into madness. "You wanted to protect this world," Naruto thought, a thread of empathy weaving through his mind. "But you became a tyrant to do it. Power untempered by wisdom is a poison," Kaguya's voice whispered, laden with the sorrow of 1,000 years. "I had the power of a god, but the heart of a frightened woman. You, child, you have the potential for a power that will eclipse even my own. But you have a kindness I never did. Do not make my mistakes." Do not let fear guide your hand. Chakra is the connection between all living things. It is the language of life itself. Use it to nurture, to protect, to understand. I will teach you its every secret, its every form. I will be the guide I never had. Naruto felt a sense of profound gratitude. He was not alone. He had a teacher, a mentor born from the very source of the power that now defined his world. He turned his attention to the silent, black lake. As he gazed into its starlit depths, knowledge flowed into him, not as words, but as pure, cold concepts. He understood the structure of a soul, its physical anchor, its spiritual composition. He understood the concept of karma, the invisible ledger of cause and effect that clung to every sentient being. He understood the role of death not as an end, but as a transition. A necessary part of a cycle as fundamental as breathing. The Shinigami did not speak, for it was not a being of personality or emotion. It was an executive function of the cosmos, a law made manifest. And its presence within him granted him the perception of its domain. He now saw the world through the impartial eyes of a judge, a warden of cosmic balance. It was a heavy, sobering perspective. Finally, he faced the crystalline monolith. As he focused on it, his mind was filled with the language of mathematics, physics, and geometry. He saw the elegant dance of quarks and leptons, the fundamental forces that govern matter, the blueprint of a simple hydrogen atom and the complex protein chain of a living cell. It was the logic of creation, the divine architecture of reality. Arceus did not speak of morality or history, it spoke of possibility and function. It gave him the instruction manual to the universe itself. It was from this source that he had understood how to unmake Haku's mirrors and remake Sasuke's flesh. It was a power of terrifying, limitless potential. Creation, life, death. The three were not separate entities vying for control. They were a balanced, tripartite council. And he, Naruto Uzumaki, was the chamber in which they met. With this newfound understanding, he turned his full attention to the cage. Inside, the great nine-tailed fox, Kurama, was watching him. Its massive, slitted eyes filled with a mixture of shock, resentment, and a flicker of something new, uncertainty. Naruto walked forward until he stood directly before the gate. He didn't shout. He didn't demand. He simply reached out and placed his mental hand upon the seal. He could feel the intricate dance of energy within it, the genius of his own father's work. "Hello, Kurama," Naruto projected, his mental voice calm and even. The great fox flinched, its ears flattening against its skull. How do you know that name?" The Kyuubi's voice thundered in his mind. A sound that had once terrified him but now sounded merely loud. "I know many things now," Naruto replied. "I know your name. I know that you are not a mindless monster, but a sentient being born from the Jubi. I know that you and your 8 siblings were once part of a whole, and you were given names by the man you called father. I know that you have been feared, hunted, and sealed for centuries. Treated as nothing more than a natural disaster or a weapon of war." Kurama was stunned into silence. No human had ever spoken to him like this. They had either tried to dominate him, like Madara, or placate him, like Hashirama. Or simply treated him as a prisoner, like all his Jinchuriki before. None had ever addressed him as a person. "This cage is an insult to you," Naruto continued, his hand still on the seal. "And it is a prison for me. It separates us, forces us into the roles of prisoner and warden. But we are more than that. We are linked. Your soul is bound to mine. Your life is my life." "What is this, boy?" Kurama snarled, though the threat lacked its usual conviction. "Some new trick? You think a few kind words will make me your pet?" "No," Naruto said simply. "I don't want a pet. I don't want a weapon. I want a partner." He focused his will on the seal. The complex formula of the 8 trigrams seal unwound in his mind. With a simple, mental command, the intricate lines of ink on the paper tag dissolved. The lock on the great gate clicked open, and the massive red bars swung inward with a low, groaning sound, leaving the way clear. Kurama stared, dumbfounded, at the open gate. Freedom. The path to it was right there. He could flood this boy's system with his chakra, overwhelm his mind, and seize control, perhaps even break the seal entirely. He tensed, his massive muscles coiling. A sea of malevolent red chakra beginning to pool around him. "You could," Naruto said, reading the fox's intent as clearly as if it were written in a book. You could try to possess me. But Kaguya's knowledge of chakra would contain you. The Shinigami's authority over souls would anchor me. Arceus's logic would simply rewrite the rules of your chakra to render it inert. It would be a pointless struggle. Or, Naruto paused, letting the silence stretch. You could walk out of that gate as an ally. We could face the world together. The choice is yours. For the first time in centuries, Kurama was faced with a genuine choice. For the first time, a human was offering him not subjugation, but an alliance of equals. He looked at the calm, small figure before him, a boy who now held the knowledge of goddesses, gods, and creators within him. He saw the absolute confidence, the lack of fear, the simple, honest offer. The red, hateful chakra slowly receded. With a deep, rumbling sigh that shook the very foundations of the mindscape, the great fox lay down, placing his massive head upon his paws. He did not walk out. Not yet, but the message was clear. He was listening. The partnership had begun. Naruto gave a small, internal smile and pulled his consciousness back to the physical world. He opened his eyes. Only a few minutes had passed. The tea in his cup was still warm. The room was still silent. Everyone watching him. The week passed in a blur of quiet observation. Naruto helped the villagers finish the bridge, and his help was a thing of subtle miracles. A support beam was cut too short. Naruto would touch the wood, and it would lengthen by the exact half-inch needed. A worker was about to fall. A sudden, impossibly strong gust of wind would push him back to safety. He never made a show of it, but Kakashi saw it all, his mind struggling to categorize the abilities on display. When the time came to leave, the entire village came to see them off at tea. He newly christened Great Naruto Bridge. The journey back to Konoha was as quiet as the journey from the bridge had been. Naruto walked slightly apart from his team. Sakura tried to bridge the gap once, her voice hesitant. Naruto, what you did, for Sasuke-kun, thank you. Naruto turned to her. He saw the swirling mix of fear, gratitude, and confusion in her soul. He saw her own chakra, a pale pink, healthy but wildly uncontrolled. A testament to her neglected potential. He is my teammate, Naruto said, his tone even, lacking the boisterous affection he had once showered her with. I would not let him die. The simple, honest statement was somehow more chilling to her than his old, loud declarations. It was as if he were discussing a law of nature. She couldn't find a reply and retreated back to Sasuke's side. Sasuke himself was the most conflicted. He had been saved, his life restored perfectly by the one person he had always considered a bumbling fool, a dead last. He had witnessed a display of power that dwarfed anything he had ever seen or read about. It wasn't just a powerful jutsu, it was a violation of the known laws of the world. His desire to surpass his brother, a goal that had defined his entire existence, now seemed almost quaint. How could he strive to defeat a man like Itachi when his own teammate could unmake reality with a gesture? For the first time, Sasuke Uchiha felt hopelessly outclassed. And the feeling was a venomous cocktail of fury, jealousy, and a grudging, terrifying respect. They arrived at the gates of Konoha under a brilliant blue sky. The familiar sight of his home village did not stir the excitement it once had. He looked at the faces carved into the mountain behind the village. The Hokage. He had once screamed to the heavens that he would one day have his face up there. Now, he looked at the stone faces and felt the weight of their souls. He felt the lingering essence of Hashirama's hope, Tobirama's pragmatism, Hiruzen's weary burden, and his own father's brilliant, sacrificial love. He saw the position not as a goal to be achieved, a prize to be won, but as a profound responsibility. And as Kaguya's knowledge whispered in his mind of the celestial threats lurking in the dark between the stars, he wondered if even the title of Hokage would be enough. His duty might be to the entire world, not just a single village. As Kakashi went to report to the third Hokage, Naruto simply said, I'm going home. He walked through the streets of Konoha, a ghost in his own life. The villagers who had once glared at him with hate or fear now barely noticed the quiet, blonde-haired boy. He was no longer a target for their scorn, because the loud, obnoxious energy that had drawn their ire was gone. He had become invisible. He reached his small, lonely apartment. He opened the door and was greeted by the familiar sight of his messy room and the scent of instant ramen. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, observing the remnants of a life that no longer felt like his own. The boy who lived here was a stranger. He walked to the window and looked out over the village. He held up his hand, palm facing the sky. He focused his will, drawing on the intricate blueprint of life provided by Arceus and the life-giving energy of Kaguya. A soft, golden light enveloped his palm. From the center of it, a single, perfect seed materialized. It sprouted, a green stem pushing its way into existence. It grew rapidly, and a moment later, a leaf unfurled from the stem. It was a perfect Konoha leaf, vibrant and alive, pulsing with a faint, healthy chakra of its own. He had created life. A small, simple life, but life nonetheless. It was a terrifying, beautiful, and sobering power. He was Naruto Uzumaki, but he was also the inheritor of Kaguya's chakra, the wielder of the Shinigami's authority, and the architect of Arceus's creation. He was a boy, and he was a trinity. His childhood had ended on that misty bridge. A new, far more complex and dangerous existence had just begun. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. A disturbance in the stars. The air in the Celestic town ruins was thin, cold, and carried the weight of millennia. It smelled of ancient, carved stone, damp moss, and the crisp scent of the surrounding pine forests that climbed the slopes of Mt. Coronet. Cynthia, champion of the Sinnoh League, ran a gloved hand over the Taimu Orn bas-relief that dominated the central chamber. Her fingers, sensitive and practiced, traced the deep grooves that depicted the two great titans of legend, Dialga, the master of time, and Palkia, the shaper of space. For hours, she had been immersed in the quiet, academic bliss of her work, cross-referencing her grandmother's translations of ancient texts with the subtle, undiscovered nuances in the carvings. Beside her, a hulking figure rested, its powerful form a stark contrast to the delicate historical work. Garchomp, her partner and friend, was curled as tightly as a creature of its size could manage. Its sandpapery hide the color of deep twilight. Its eyes were closed, but its senses were perpetually alert, a silent, loyal guardian amidst the ghosts of history. The only sounds were the whisper of the mountain wind through the cracks in the stone and the soft scratch of Cynthia's charcoal pencil as she made notes in her journal. It was a perfect, peaceful solitude. And then, reality stuttered. It began not as a sound or a sight, but as a feeling, a sudden, violent lurch in the fabric of the world, as if the planet had skipped a beat in its rotation. A wave of invisible energy washed through the ruins, and the air began to hum, vibrating with a power that tasted of ozone and charged particles. The ancient carvings, inert stone for thousands of years, erupted with a brilliant, silent light. The lines depicting Dialga blazed with an ethereal blue, and the form of Palkia pulsed with a luminous, pearlescent pink. Cynthia stumbled back, her hand flying away from the now glowing wall as if burned. Her analytical mind, usually so calm and ordered, was thrown into a state of high alert. What in Arceus's name? Garchomp was instantly on its feet, a low, guttural growl rumbling in its chest. The fin on its head stood rigid, and its yellow eyes scanned the chamber, trying to locate the source of the disturbance. But the threat wasn't something it could bite or tear. It was everywhere. The very geometry of the room seemed to flicker at the edges of her vision, the corners of the stone chamber elongating and contracting in a nauseating pulse. Just as quickly as it began, the primary wave passed. The light in the carvings faded, the humming ceased, and the spatial distortion snapped back into place. But a lingering energy remained, a faint, static charge in the eye. That made the hairs on Cynthia's arms stand on end. It felt alien, a frequency of power her world was not meant to produce. Her personal Pokémon buzzed urgently, the screen lighting up with a priority call from Sanjam Town. She flipped it open, her face grim. The familiar, stern face of Professor Rowan appeared, his trademark white mustache bristling with agitation. Cynthia, report. Did you feel that? His voice was sharp, cutting through the static. I more than felt it, Professor, she replied, her gaze still fixed on the carving where a faint afterglow still lingered. The entire ruin lit up like a festival lantern. Temporal and spatial energy signatures, off the charts. It felt violent, unnatural. It's happening all over Sinnoh, Rowan said, his brow furrowed with deep concern. The unknown at Solician ruins have arranged themselves into patterns we've never seen, broadcasting a psychic signal of pure panic. We've detected a severe spatial warping event over Lake Verity, and our observatory on MT Coronet registered a temporal shockwave, an echo, as if a single second had been stretched and snapped back into place. This wasn't a natural phenomenon. Cynthia's mind was already racing, piecing together the disparate reports. A disturbance affecting time, space, and even the psychically sensitive unknown. The common factor was a connection to legendary Pokémon, to the very pillars of their reality. It's a foundational event, she murmured, more to herself than to the professor. Something happened that shook the entire dimensional framework. My thoughts exactly, Rowan agreed. I need you back at the lab. My team is analyzing the energy residue, but the data is unlike anything we've ever encountered. And Cynthia, the epicenter isn't on our planet. In fact, it doesn't seem to be in our universe at all. Quote, an hour later, Cynthia's Garchomp landed with a soft thud outside the modern, sprawling research facility in Sanjam Town. She strode into the main analysis hall, a place of gleaming white surfaces, humming servers, and holographic displays. Several researchers were rushing about, their faces etched with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Rowan stood before the primary display, a massive, three-dimensional map of the Sinnoh region. Show me the data, Cynthia commanded, her voice cutting through the controlled chaos. We've been mapping the residual energy signatures, Rowan explained, gesturing to the map. A Porygon Z, its digital form flickering, was projecting a complex overlay of data points onto the hologram. The signatures are strongest at locations tied to the creation trio. Here, at your location in Celestic Town, the Solician ruins, the Three Lakes, and most prominently, at the Spear Pillar. On the map, shimmering points of light pulsed at the locations he named. But look at the energy decay pattern, Rowan continued, zooming in on the data stream. It's not radiating from a single point within Sinnoh. It's bleeding through. Imagine our dimension as a sheet of paper. The energy isn't coming from a point on the paper, but from a pinprick being pushed through from underneath. Cynthia absorbed this, her gaze intense. An extra-dimensional source. But what could generate that much power? Enough to make our reality ripple. That's the billion Pokédollar question, the professor grumbled. The energy itself is the strangest part. It's not antimatter. It's not exotic dark energy. It shares some properties with the psychic energy of Pokémon, but it's structured, almost, biological. It behaves less like a raw force of phi, SICS and more like a living circulatory system. We're calling it chakra, for now, for lack of a better term. Cynthia walked closer to the hologram, her sharp mind dissecting the information. A biological energy from another dimension. Powerful enough to agitate Dialga and Palkia. This was no longer just a scientific curiosity. This was a potential threat to the stability of her world. As champion, its protection was her ultimate responsibility. The Spear Pillar, she said, her voice firm. The concentration is highest there. It's the nexus, the point where the veil between dimensions is thinnest in our region. If we want to understand what's happening, we need to go to the source. The ascent to the peak of MT Coronet was swift. The air grew thinner and colder, the winds whipping with furious intensity. But for Cynthia and her Garchomp, it was a familiar journey. They arrived at the summit, the ancient, crumbling ruins of the Spear Pillar surrounding them. This was where the world was born. The place where Dialga and Palkia were said to have been brought into existence by Arceus itself. The very stones here thrummed with a power that transcended time and space. The residual energy was palpable. A low hum that vibrated in her bones. As she walked towards the central dais, the spot where the red chain could be used to summon the Titans, the world flickered again. This time, it was more than a physical sensation. A wave of raw, psychic information washed over her, an echo of the event that had caused the disturbance. Her vision blurred. She was no longer on a snowy mountaintop. She was on a bridge. Surrounded by mist, she tasted blood and salt on her tongue. She felt a surge of all-consuming grief, the pain of a child seeing his brother fall. Then came a firestorm of rage, red and hateful. But it was instantly snuffed out, consumed by an impossibly vast, white light. Then, the whispers. 3 voices, 3 consciousnesses, speaking at once in her mind. One was ancient and maternal, filled with an eternity of sorrow and the deep, flowing power of life itself. The second was cold, impartial, and absolute, a voice that did not speak in words but in concepts of balance, finality, and the weight of souls. The third was a silent song of pure logic, a beautiful, crystalline symphony of physics and mathematics that defined the very act of creation. She felt the three presences slam together, merging into a single, new, stable consciousness within the heart of the grieving boy. It was a birth, an awakening, the creation of something entirely new, a being whose existence was a paradox of creation, life, and death. Cynthia gasped, stumbling back, a hand to her head. The vision vanished, leaving her breathless on the cold stones of Spear Pillar, her heart hammering against her ribs. Garchomp was instantly at her side, nudging her with its head, a worried rumble in its throat. "I'm all right, Garchomp," she reassured her partner, her voice slightly shaky. I think I just witnessed the cause." She now understood. The disturbance wasn't a weapon or a natural disaster. It was a person. A single, sentient being had undergone a transformation so profound, so cosmically significant, that the shockwaves of their apotheosis had bled through the multiverse. This changed everything. A person could be reasoned with. But a person with that level of power was also an unprecedented variable. Her duty was clearer than ever. She couldn't just study this phenomenon. She had to make contact. Returning to the lab, she explained what she had seen. Rowan listened intently, his expression growing more grim with every word. "A sentient nexus," he mused, stroking his mustache. "A being that has somehow become a living bridge for multiple, fundamental cosmic forces. The potential is staggering, and so is the danger. If this individual is unstable, they could unravel their own reality and ours along with it. Which is why I have to go," Cynthia stated, her resolve like steel. "I have to meet them. Understand them. As a researcher, I am compelled by the mystery. As champion, I am bound by duty to assess the threat." "Go," Rowan exclaimed. "Cynthia, talking about traveling to another dimension. We have no idea what the conditions are, what the laws of physics are, whether you could even survive there. The energy that bled through is quasi-biological. It follows rules, which means its source reality has rules," she countered, her mind already working through the logistics. "Your team can analyze the rift signatures. Isolate the source frequency. You said the veil is thinnest at Spear Pillar. Can you create a stable, localized entry point? A temporary gateway?" The professor looked at her, seeing the unshakable determination in her eyes. It was the same look she had before facing the Elite Four, the same look she wore when delving into ruins that had been sealed for centuries. It was the look of a champion. He sighed. "Theoretically, it's possible. It would take all of our resources. We could use a modified magnetic resonator to attune to the energy frequency you experienced and create a stable wormhole. But it would be incredibly dangerous. And the portal would likely be unstable. We might only be able to keep it open for a short time. Give me a window. That's all I need," she said. The next 2 weeks were a blur of intense preparation. Rowan's team worked around the clock, converting a massive piece of research equipment into a dimensional resonator. Cynthia, meanwhile, prepared for her expedition. She chose her team of 6 Pokémon with meticulous care, selecting not just for power, but for versatility. Garchomp for strength and familiarity, Melodic for defense and its calming abilities, Lucario for its Orasay NSING capabilities that might help her track the strange, Chakra, energy, Spiritomb for its unconventional ghostly properties, Roserade for status effects and healing, and Togekiss for aerial support and its serene grace. She packed research equipment, scanners, sample containers, and a specially shielded Pokéger designed to record and analyze the alien energy. She studied every scrap of data they had, trying to build a theoretical model of the world she was about to enter. The psychic echoes from the Lake Guardians, whom she had communed with at Lake Verity, had provided cryptic but crucial images, a world of green forests, walled villages, and warriors who wielded the chakra energy as if it were an extension of their own bodies. On the final day, she visited her grandmother in Celestic Town. The old woman, the keeper of the town's history, looked at her with wise, knowing eyes. "You are chasing a new myth," she said, her voice like the rustling of old parchment. or perhaps preventing one from ending in tragedy. Cynthia replied, a soft smile on her lips. They stood together in the ruins where it had all begun. The evening sun cast long shadows, and the air was once again peaceful. Be the champion they need. Not just the one we have, her grandmother advised, placing a frail, warm hand on Cynthia's arm. Now, she stood once more upon the spear pillar. The wind was gone. An unnatural stillness had fallen over the mountain peak. Before her, Rowan's team had assembled the resonator, a massive ring of humming metal and wires. At its center, the air itself was being torn open. It wasn't a clean, shimmering portal from a science fiction story. It was an ugly, jagged rift in space, a shimmering wound that flickered and sparked with raw power. Through it, she could see glimpses of a world utterly alien to her own. Impossibly tall trees, a canopy of green so dense it blotted out the sky. The air that flowed out of it smelled of rich, damp earth, of chlorophyll, and of that strange, vital energy she now knew as chakra. Professor Rowan gave her a final, worried look. The portal will only be stable for an estimated 30 minutes. Once you are through, we cannot guarantee a return path. Cynthia, be careful. She gave him a confident nod. Knowledge is never gained without risk, Professor. She turned to face the rift. Garchomp stood at her side, its body a tense coil of power, ready to follow her into oblivion if she asked. She pulled her black coat tighter around herself, her expression one of calm, focused resolve. She was Cynthia, scholar of myths, seeker of knowledge, champion of Sinnoh. And she was about to step into a new world to meet the being whose birth had shaken the stars. With one final look at the familiar sky of her home, she took a deep breath and stepped across the threshold. From her world into his. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Forest of Quiet Predators. The air at the edge of the 44th training ground was a physical presence. It was heavy, humid, and smelled of 1,000 years of rot, of damp earth, and the faint, coppery tang of old blood. A 30-foot-high fence of interlocking steel surrounded the entire forest, punctuated by 44 locked gates. It wasn't a fence to keep people out, it was a cage to keep things in. A woman with violet hair tied in a spiky ponytail stood before the assembled genin, a manic, predatory grin stretched across her face. She wore a fishnet bodysuit under a tan overcoat, a testament to a personality that cared little for convention and even less for the opinions of others. This was Anko Mitarashi, the proctor for the second stage of the Chunin exams. All right, brats, listen up, she yelled, her voice carrying an edge of wild enthusiasm. Welcome to my playground. Before we begin, I've got something for you all to sign. She gestured to her aides, who began passing out standard liability waivers. It's just a consent form. Why? Because from this point on, you can expect people to die. Her lethal declaration sent a ripple of fear through the assembled rookies. Sakura shuddered, and even Sasuke's jaw tightened. Naruto, however, simply watched the proctor, his senses processing her on a level far beyond her words or appearance. He didn't just see a wild kunoichi. He saw a soul in a state of constant, simmering agony. With the perception granted by the Shinigami, he looked at the black 3-tomo tattoo on her neck and saw it for what it truly was. It wasn't ink. It was a spiritual parasite, a festering brand of Orochimaru's foul, diluted chakra that had burrowed into her soul. It was a leash, a source of unending pain, a fragment of her former master that she could never escape. It pulsed with a weak but malevolent energy, a constant whisper of violation. He felt a detached, clinical empathy for her, the way a doctor might pity a patient with a chronic, incurable disease. Anko's eyes scanned the crowd and landed on Naruto. She noticed his calm, his utter lack of reaction to her threats. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. With a flick of her wrist, a kunai materialized in her hand. It flew through the air, a silver streak aimed directly at him. Just as it was about to pierce his eye, another kunai, impossibly long and slick, intercepted it with a sharp clang. The second kunai had been thrown by a grass ninja with a strangely serpentine face and dead, cold eyes. Anko appeared behind Naruto in a swirl of leaves, her grin widening. You're not scared, kid. Tough guys like you are usually the first to die, spilling all that pretty red blood. She licked her lips theatrically. Naruto didn't even flinch at her sudden appearance. He simply turned his head slightly and looked at her, his cosmic blue eyes holding no fear, only a quiet, unnerving focus. He didn't respond to her taunt. Instead, he let his gaze drift for a fraction of a second to the cursed seal on her neck. It was a look of such profound, analytical depth that Anko instinctively took a half step back, her manic grin faltering. For a moment, she felt like she was the one being examined, dissected by a gaze that saw far too much. Before the strange moment could stretch, the grass ninja appeared, returning Anko's kunai with their impossibly long tongue, their unsettling presence diffusing the tension. Anko quickly regained her composure, explaining the rules of the exam, a 5-day survival test to secure one of 2 scrolls. Heaven and Earth, and bring them to the tower at the center of the forest. All right, you maggots, she finished, pointing a dramatic finger at the gates. The second exam begins, now. The gates flew open, and teams surged forward into the gloomy twilight of the forest canopy. Team 7 moved as one, melting into the undergrowth. For a few minutes, they ran, the adrenaline of the exams start pushing them onward. Okay, what's the plan? Sasuke asked, his Sharingan already active as he scanned their surroundings. We need to find a team with a heaven scroll, take them down fast. And get to the tower. Sakura nodded, her eyes wide as she took in the oppressive environment. We should be careful. Anko-sensei said this place is filled with giant animals and poisonous insects. They both looked to Naruto, expecting a loud, boisterous declaration. Instead, he had come to a silent stop. He stood with his eyes closed, his head tilted slightly as if listening to a distant song. Naruto, what are you doing? We have to move, Sakura hissed. The world is loud in here, Naruto said, his voice a low murmur. He opened his eyes, and the universe within them seemed to settle. This way, stay close. Quote, he didn't run, he moved with a fluid, silent grace that was completely alien to him. He led them on a winding, seemingly random path through the dense woods. To Sasuke and Sakura, it felt like aimless wandering. But after 20 minutes, they began to notice a pattern. Just as they heard a massive crash to their right, Naruto would have already guided them to the left. When a flock of birds suddenly took flight in a panic up ahead, he had already steered them down a different, quieter path. He was avoiding trouble with a prescience that was beyond uncanny. He wasn't just guessing, he was perceiving. His senses, a fusion of Kaguya's chakra perception and the Shinigami's soul sight, had expanded to form a 3-dimensional map of the entire forest in his mind. He could feel the lumbering life force of a 20-foot-long tiger a mile to the north. He could sense the nervous, skittering chakra signatures of a genin team setting a trap half a mile to the south. He perceived the entire forest as a complex web of interacting energies, and he was simply guiding his team through the gaps in that web. Suddenly, he stopped, holding up a hand. Sasuke and Sakura froze, immediately on guard. What is it? Sasuke whispered, his eyes scanning the trees. Rain ninja, Naruto said quietly. 3 of them, up ahead, concealed with a jutsu. They're waiting for us to walk into their genjutsu trap. Sasuke activated his Sharingan again, peering intently into the foliage. He saw nothing. I don't see anything, Dobi. Your eyes see chakra on the surface, Naruto explained patiently. Without a hint of his old annoyance. I feel the souls that are generating it. They are there. He pointed to 3 specific spots in the dense canopy. One there, and the third behind that large trunk. Before Sasuke could argue, Naruto moved. He placed his palm flat on the damp earth. He didn't perform any hand signs. He simply focused on the concept from Arceus, bind. The ground beneath the 3 locations he had indicated suddenly softened, turning from solid earth to thick, grasping mud. 3 surprised yelps echoed through the trees as the hidden Rain ninja found their feet and legs instantly encased. As they struggled, Naruto channeled a minuscule, precise thread of Kaguya's chakra through the ground, into their bodies. It wasn't an attack, it was a gentle instruction to their nervous systems to shut down. Their eyes rolled back into their heads, and all 3 slumped into unconsciousness, held upright by the mud. Naruto walked calmly into the clearing. He retrieved a heaven scroll from the pack of one of the unconscious ninja, then placed his hand on the ground again. The mud solidified back into normal earth, releasing them. He returned to his stunned teammates. We have both scrolls now, he said, holding up their Earth Scroll and the New Heaven Scroll. Let's get to the tower. Sasuke stared, his mouth slightly agape. The entire engagement had taken less than 10 seconds. There was no fight, no struggle, no jutsu shouted to the heavens. Just a quiet, absolute, and terrifying efficiency. The gap between them, which Sasuke had once measured in inches, had become a chasm as wide as the ocean. They continued their journey, the mood now even more tense. Sakura and Sasuke followed their enigmatic teammate, their minds reeling. Their trek was interrupted by a sudden, immense gust of wind. It wasn't a natural phenomenon, it was the arrival of a predator. A colossal snake, as thick as the tree trunks around them, crashed through the canopy and landed before them, its yellow, slitted eyes fixing them with a cold, hungry stare. Sakura screamed. Sasuke drew a kunai, his body trembling but ready to fight. This was a summoning, a beast far beyond what any genin should face. Naruto, however, didn't draw a weapon. He simply looked at the giant snake. He felt its soul, a simple, primal thing driven by hunger and instinct. But beneath that, he felt the tether of the summoning jutsu, and the faint, corrupt signature of the one who had summoned it. Orochimaru. He focused his will, not on the snake itself, but on the concept of dominance. He projected a sliver of the combined authority of the Trinity within him, the regal presence of Kaguya, the absolute finality of the Shinigami, and the cosmic weight of a creator. It wasn't chakra, it wasn't killing intent. It was a pure, undiluted wave of absolute spiritual pressure. The giant snake, a creature that operated on instinct, recoiled as if it had been physically struck. Its primal brain, capable only of understanding the hierarchy of predator and prey, was suddenly flooded with the realization that the small, blonde creature before it was not food. It was not a threat. It was a force of nature so far above it on the cosmic food chain that to even consider it prey was a form of blasphemy. The snake let out a terrified, hissing whine, and with a speed that defied its massive size. It turned and burrowed frantically into the earth, desperate to escape. He's here, Naruto said, his calm eyes scanning the silent trees. A cold, slithering voice echoed from the canopy. My, what an interesting little toy you've become, Kyuubi boy. The grass ninja from the exam's start dropped from a branch, landing softly on the ground. A long, serpentine tongue snaked out and licked its lips. The killing intent rolled off of them in a palpable wave, a suffocating aura of death that made the very air grow cold. Sakura collapsed, hyperventilating. Sasuke stood his ground, but his knees were shaking uncontrollably, sweat beading on his forehead. This pressure was absolute. It was the presence of a true monster. Naruto remained completely unaffected. To his senses, the killing intent was just noise. A crude and brutish attempt at intimidation. He looked at the being before him, his gaze cutting through the physical disguise and piercing straight to the soul within. What he saw was grotesque. Orochimaru's soul was not a single entity. It was a tattered, patched-together mess, a Frankenstein's monster of spiritual essence. The original core of the man known as Orochimaru was faint, a dim, flickering ember. It was surrounded by the stolen fragments of other souls, the spiritual residue of the bodies he had possessed. It was a soul that had been deliberately ripped and stitched back together so many times that it had lost all cohesion. It was a being trying to achieve immortality by destroying the very thing that made it unique. Orochimaru of the Sannin, Naruto said, his voice devoid of fear or reverence. You have traveled far from the path of humanity. Orochimaru's eyes widened, the smile freezing on his face. The disguise melted away, revealing the pale, snake-like features of the legendary ninja. Oh, you know me, and here I thought I was being discreet. You were full of surprises. There is no surprise, Naruto stated, his tone flat and analytical. I see a man who has torn his own essence into pieces to outrun a concept he cannot defeat. You collect bodies like a child collects insects, believing you are preserving yourself. You are only diluting what little remains of your origin. You chase knowledge, but you have forgotten the most basic wisdom. A vessel, no matter how strong, is meaningless without a worthy soul to fill it. Yours is a pathetic, shredded thing. The Sannin's silky facade shattered. No one had ever spoken to him like this. He was a legend, a being of terror and power. This genin was looking at him with pity. A cold, furious rage bubbled up from within him. A cheeky brat, he hissed, his neck elongating as he shot towards Naruto, his hand glowing with the violet chakra of the five-pronged seal. I will seal away your power and leave you an empty, drooling husk. His speed was incredible, his fangs bared. Sasuke couldn't even track the movement. But to Naruto, whose mind processed the world at a speed far beyond the physical, Orochimaru was moving through water. He saw the intent before the action, the flow of chakra before the jutsu was formed. He didn't dodge, he simply raised his hand and caught Orochimaru's wrist in an iron grip. The Sannin's eyes bulged in shock. A genin had caught him. But the real shock came a moment later. As he tried to channel the sealing jutsu into Naruto, he felt his chakra die. Naruto, holding his wrist, was not pushing back with his own chakra. He was simply issuing a command. Using the absolute authority of the creator essence within him, he instructed Orochimaru's chakra to cease its function. The complex, malevolent formula of the five-pronged seal unraveled, its energy dissipating into harmless, inert particles. The violet glow on Orochimaru's hand fizzled and vanished. Your jutsu is based on imbalance, Naruto said calmly, his fingers tightening around the Sannin's unnaturally pliant wrist. It disrupts the harmony of another's chakra network. But it is powerless against a system in perfect balance. Orochimaru stared, his snake-like mind unable to process what was happening. This was impossible. This defied every principle of ninjutsu he had ever learned. This boy wasn't fighting him. He was editing him. With a surge of strength, Orochimaru tore his arm from Naruto's grasp and leapt back, putting a considerable distance between them. He was breathing heavily, not from exertion, but from a mixture of rage and a chilling, intellectual fear. This boy was not a Jinchuriki. He was something else. A prize infinitely more valuable than the Sharingan. You, what are you? Orochimaru hissed, his curiosity now overriding his anger. Naruto lowered his hand. I am the one who will correct a past mistake. He glanced pointedly in the direction of Konoha. A clear reference to the curse mark he knew Orochimaru had left on his former student. The fragment of your soul that you discarded and left to fester in Anko Midarashi, I will be taking it back. A soul is not a toy to be broken and thrown away. That was the final blow. The boy not only knew of his curse mark, he understood its fundamental nature and had declared his intent to remove it. Orochimaru stared at Naruto, his mind racing. This wasn't just a powerful vessel anymore. This was a cosmic anomaly, a being that held the key to knowledge he had only dreamed of. He had to have him. He had to study him. But a direct confrontation now, against a being who could nullify his jutsu with a touch, was illogical. With a final, lingering stare that promised a future of obsessive pursuit, Orochimaru melted back into the shadows of the forest, retreating to observe and to plan. Naruto stood in the silence for a moment before turning to his two teammates, who were still paralyzed on the ground, staring at him with expressions of pure, unadulterated shock and terror. He sighed softly. The path he walked was going to be a lonely one. He closed his eyes, ignoring his team for a moment, and expanded his senses once more across the forest. He felt the swirling, tormented vortex of a soul in the south, a being of sand and bloodlust named Gaara. He felt the cold, calculating chakra of a spy named Kabuto. His soul a deceptive shade of gray. And he felt the raw, defiant, and angry energy of the sound team that Orochimaru had brought as his pawns. He focused on the female of the group, Tayuya, feeling her unique chakra, a vibrant, discordant melody of sound and fury. He catalogued them all. They were pieces on a board he was only just beginning to understand. But for the first time, he felt he had the perspective to see the entire game. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. A Champion's Arrival. The transition was not a gentle one. Stepping through the rift was like being plunged into a sea of static and pressure. The air was thick, heavy, and saturated with an energy that made her teeth ache. For a dizzying second, her senses were overwhelmed by the raw, untamed vitality of a new dimension. Then, with a final, violent shudder, her feet found solid ground. Behind her, the ugly, shimmering tear in reality crackled with unstable energy. It shrank rapidly, folding in on itself like a collapsing star. And with a sickening sound like tearing silk, it snapped shut, leaving behind only an unnerving silence and the lingering scent of ozone. The gateway was gone. She was cut off. A solitary island of the known in an ocean of the utterly alien. Cynthia's heart beat a steady, disciplined rhythm. Panic was a luxury a champion could not afford. She stood perfectly still for a full minute, her senses reaching out, building a composite image of her new environment. The air was warm, humid, and rich with the smell of deep, wet earth, countless species of blooming flora, and the subtle, musky scent of animal life. The gravity felt fractionally stronger, a small but noticeable detail. Above, a dense canopy of colossal trees, larger than any she had ever seen in Sinnoh, blotted out the sky, casting the forest floor in a perpetual, emerald twilight. She was in a small, secluded clearing. The plant life was vibrant, almost aggressively so. This world was teeming with life energy. The same quasi-biological force her instruments had detected. She could feel it now, a constant, low-level thrum in the very air she breathed. She understood immediately why the psychic echoes had described a world of warriors who wielded this energy. Here, it was as abundant as oxygen. Garchomp, reconnaissance pattern Delta, she commanded softly. The Pokeball on her belt opened with a flash of red light. And her partner materialized beside her, its powerful form a comforting presence in the alien landscape. Garchomp let out a low growl, its senses already on high alert. Without another word, the land shark Pokémon melted into the shadows of the massive trees, beginning a silent, sweeping patrol of the immediate area. While Garchomp secured the perimeter, Cynthia established a base camp. From a specialized, dimensionally compressed pack, she retrieved a small, camouflaged shelter and a suite of scientific instruments. She worked with a practiced, methodical efficiency, her movements precise and economical. Within 20 minutes, she had a secure, hidden position and was already taking atmospheric and energy readings. The data that streamed onto her modified Pokegear's screen was fascinating. The energy, this chakra, was everywhere. It flowed through the soil, was absorbed by the plants, and was present in a much higher concentration in the fauna. It was the fundamental building block of this world's ecosystem. Garchomp returned, giving a soft chuff to signal the area was clear. No immediate threats within a 5-kilometer radius. Good work, Cynthia praised, giving the Pokémon a fond scratch under its powerful jaw. Stay here and guard the camp. I'm going to get a look at the local civilization. She recalled Garchomp into its ball to avoid detection and set off. A silent shadow moving through the dense undergrowth. She traveled for an hour, her movements swift and silent, before she saw it, a wall. It was a massive structure of wood and stone, at least 50 feet high, stretching as far as she could see in either direction. Atop the wall, she could just make out the silhouettes of guards, their forms sharp against the sky. It was a pre-industrial fortress, but the scale was immense. This was a society built for defense, a culture forged in conflict. She spent the next few hours circling the settlement, observing from a safe distance. The walls encompassed a vast area, and at its heart, carved into the face of a mountain, were 4 colossal faces, a monument of startling clarity and craftsmanship. It was clearly a seat of power, the symbol of this society's leadership. She needed to get inside. Her infiltration was a calculated exercise in patience and observation. She found a section of the wall that bordered a river, noting the patrol's schedules and the blind spots between their routes. Her physical conditioning was superb, but she was not a shinobi. She couldn't run up walls or leap between trees with their impossible grace. She had to rely on intellect. Waiting for the precise moment between patrol sweeps at dusk, she used a compact grappling launcher to scale the wall, a dark, fleeting shape against the weathered wood. She drove PPED silently into the shadows of an alleyway inside, her heart beating with the thrill of successful entry. The city, the village, as she would learn it was called, was a sensory explosion. Kanahagakure, a village hidden in the leaves. It was a stunning, bewildering blend of feudal Japanese aesthetics and something else entirely. The buildings were mostly wood, with elegant, tiled roofs. Paper lanterns cast a warm, flickering glow over streets bustling with people. There was no sign of electricity, no hum of motors, no sleek lines of modern technology. The air smelled of wood smoke, sizzling meats from street-side stalls, and the rich, savory aroma of noodle broth. Yet, it was not primitive. She saw metallurgists crafting steel of a quality that would be the envy of any historian in her world. She saw complex irrigation systems and an organized civil structure. And then there were the people. Civilians in simple kimonos and yukatas mingled with shinobi in their standardized flak jackets and strange forehead-protecting headbands. Weapons were worn openly, not with aggression, but with the casual readiness of a populace for whom combat was a part of life. She needed to blend in. She used some of the local currency, ryo. She had identified it as, that had been included in her research kit to purchase a simple, dark-colored cloak. Hood up, she became just another anonymous figure in the bustling evening crowd. She walked through a marketplace, her mind a whirlwind of anthropological analysis. She noted the power dynamics, the clear respect and slight fear afforded to the shinobi. She noted the economy, the types of food, the social customs. Her first true shock came as she was passing a small, open-air tea house. She saw a flash of green and a blur of motion overhead that her trained eyes could barely track. A man in a garish green jumpsuit with impossibly thick eyebrows zipped across the rooftops, shouted something about the flames of youth, and then leapt a 50-foot gap between buildings with the ease of a child skipping over a puddle. Cynthia stopped dead in her tracks, her composure the only thing keeping her jaw from dropping. She immediately ran the physics in her head. The required muscle density, tendon strength, and force generation for such a feat were far beyond the scope of human biology as she knew it. It was a physical impossibility. That was chakra. It wasn't just an energy source. It was a biological enhancement that shattered the known limits of physical performance. This was a world of superhumans. Her mission's priority shifted. Finding the source of the disturbance was still paramount, but understanding the rules of this new world was now a matter of immediate survival. She found a small, public archive, less a library and more a collection of public records and histories. She spent hours poring over scrolls, her brilliant mind absorbing the information at a prodigious rate. She learned of the great shinobi villages, of the cage, of the history of the great wars, and of the fundamental principles of ninjutsu, genjutsu, and taijutsu. And then she found it. A public notice board detailing the ongoing Chunin selection exams. It was a grand event. A gathering of the most promising young shinobi from many different villages to test their mettle. The third and final stage was to be a public tournament held in a grand arena in 1 week's time. This was the key. A public gathering of the village's strongest and most important figures. It was the perfect opportunity. The energy signature she was tracking was immense, far beyond that of an average shinobi. Its source would almost certainly be a participant, or at least be in attendance. It was the ideal environment to observe her target without revealing her own presence. Unseen by her, at an outdoor cafe across the street, a man was observing her. He was a tall man with a mane of white hair, strange red lines painted down his face, and a roguish, knowing glint in his eyes. To most, Jiraiya of the Sannin looked like a slightly perverted, eccentric old writer doing research. But his senses, honed by decades of espionage in the most dangerous places in the world, were second to none. And this woman set them all tingling. She was a ghost. She had appeared in the village from nowhere. Her clothes, even the cloak she had bought, were worn with a subtle unfamiliarity. Her posture was not that of a civilian. It was too poised, too controlled. Her gait had an economy of motion that spoke of intense physical training, yet her chakra signature was so faint it was practically non-existent, a feat of control that even most Anbu would find difficult. But most of all, it was her eyes. He could see them, even from this distance, scanning, analyzing, absorbing everything with a sharp, piercing intelligence that was utterly out of place. She wasn't a tourist. She wasn't a merchant. She was a professional of the highest caliber. Well now, Jiraiya murmured to himself, a grin spreading across his face. Looks like a new character just walked into my story. And I bet she's a bombshell under that dreary cloak. His interest was piqued, both professionally and personally. He would keep an eye on this fascinating, mysterious woman. Cynthia, oblivious to the Sannin's gaze, felt a different kind of scrutiny. Two shinobi wearing the standard Konoha uniform, their flak jackets marking them as Chunin, walked past her. Their senses, less refined than Jiraiya's but still potent, swept over her. She felt their casual, probing scan of her presence. She immediately relaxed her posture, adopted a slightly lost, curious expression, and focused her thoughts on something mundane, the price of rice balls at a nearby stall. She made herself an interesting, unimportant, a ghost in the machine. The feeling of being watched passed. She let out a slow, controlled breath she hadn't realized she was holding. This place was a viper's nest. Even a casual stroll was fraught with peril. She slipped out of the village as dusk turned to night, her mind buzzing with a plan. She returned to her hidden camp, the silence of the forest a welcome reprieve from the tense energy of the village. She sat before her instruments, analyzing the ambient chakra readings she had passively collected. Her objective was now clear. For the next week, she would remain hidden, studying the data, practicing her own stealth, and observing the village from afar. Then, on the day of the Chunin exam finals, she would blend in with the international crowds and enter the arena. There, amidst the grey-test display of power this village had to offer, she would find the epicenter of the storm, the being whose awakening had shaken two worlds. She stood up and walked to the edge of the clearing, looking through a gap in the trees towards the distant, lantern-lit village. The four stone faces on the mountain were illuminated by the moon, silent, gargantuan sentinels. She felt a profound sense of isolation. A single researcher millions of light years from home, on the verge of the most significant discovery in human history. She felt the weight of her duty as champion, to protect her world from this unknown variable. But beneath it all, she felt the pure, unadulterated thrill of the unknown. The scholar in her was alive with questions, and she was determined to find the answers. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. Shattered Fates and a Healer's Promise. The tower at the center of the Forest of Death was a stark, cylindrical monolith of gray stone. Inside, the air was thick with the collective tension of 24 exhausted, battered, but triumphant genin. Team 7 stood together, a small island of improbable cleanliness and calm in a sea of dirt-streaked faces and frayed nerves. They had arrived on the second day, having spent the remaining 3 in a state of quiet, unnerving limbo within the forest, a decision made by Naruto to avoid unnecessary conflict and observation. Sakura and Sasuke had not known what to make of it. Naruto had created a subtle, shifting barrier of natural energy around their campsite that seemed to warp perception, making them effectively invisible. He had spent 3 days in a state of deep meditation, his face a mask of serene concentration. Now, standing in the tower's main hall, he was once again the calm eye of the storm, his new perceptions drinking eye. And the chaotic symphony of souls around him. He felt the seething, unstable vortex of Gaara of the sand, a soul so fractured and tormented it felt like broken glass scraping against his senses. He felt the cold, deceptive slipperiness of Kabuto Yakushi, whose soul felt like a carefully constructed lie, layers of false humility hiding a core of chilling emptiness. He felt the discordant, angry thrum of the sound genin, their chakra and souls tainted by the resonance of Orochimaru's influence. The third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, stood before them, his face a mixture of pride and weary solemnity. He explained that due to the unexpectedly high number of passing teams, a preliminary round of one-on-one matches would be held immediately to whittle down the number of contestants for the final rounds. A new proctor, a sickly-looking man with a persistent cough named Hayate Gecko, took over. Behind him, a large electronic scoreboard flickered to life, names spinning in a digital lottery. The Saint match was decided. Sasuke Uchiha vs Yoroi Akato. As Sasuke went down to the arena floor, Naruto placed a hand on his shoulder. Sasuke flinched, turning to glare at him. "What?" he snapped. "His jutsu absorbs chakra on contact," Naruto said quietly, his gaze fixed on the unassuming Yoroi. "Do not let him touch you. Your taijutsu is superior. End it quickly." Sasuke stared at him, bewildered. How could he possibly know that? He shook his head, a mixture of annoyance and grudging respect warring on his face, and leapt down to the floor below. The fight unfolded exactly as Naruto had predicted. Yoroi attempted to grapple, his hands glowing with chakra-draining energy. Sasuke, forewarned, relied on the speed and precision of his Sharingan-enhanced taijutsu, finishing the match with his new Lion's Barrage. As more matches were decided, the tension in the room grew. Finally, the scoreboard spun again, landing on 2 new names that sent a jolt through the Konoha rookies. Naruto Uzumaki vs. Hiba Inuzuka. Hiba let out a wild, confident bark of a laugh. "Ha ha, looks like I hit the jackpot." he crowed, with his canine partner Akamaru yipping in agreement from atop his head. "This'll be over in 10 seconds. Sorry, Naruto, but your luck just ran out." Naruto simply gave a small, almost imperceptible nod and made his way to the arena floor. He stood opposite Kiba, his posture relaxed, his hands not even raised in a defensive stance. The sheer, unbothered calm radiating from him was more unsettling to Kiba than any threat would have been. "Begin," Hayate coughed. "Let's go, Akamaru, man-beast clone," Kiba yelled. With a puff of smoke, Akamaru transformed into a perfect replica of his master. The two Kibas dropped into the feral, four-limbed fighting stance of their clan. "You're facing two of us now, Naruto. You don't stand a chance," they shouted in unison. They shot forward, a blur of coordinated, predatory motion. To the onlookers, it was a high-speed assault. To Naruto, it was a simple, predictable pattern. He perceived the deep, symbiotic bond between Kiba and Akamaru, seeing the flow of chakra between them, a beautiful and loyal connection. He saw the trajectory of their attack, the way they intended to converge on him, their claws ready to tear and rend. He didn't dodge, he didn't retreat, he took a single, calm step forward, a move that seemed completely counterintuitive. Placing himself directly in the path of their pincer attack. Tunneling fang. The two Kibas roared, their bodies spinning into two horizontal vortexes of claws and teeth, drilling through the air towards him. It was a jutsu designed for overwhelming, brutal offense. Naruto moved. He stepped into the tiny, calm space between the two converging cyclones of motion, a place where their angular momentum made it impossible for them to strike him. It was the eye of the storm. As they shot past him on either side, he extended both hands. He didn't strike. He simply placed a single, gentle finger on the forehead of each of the spinning forms. Through those points of contact, he sent a minuscule, precise pulse of his own chakra. It was not an attack. It was a perfectly tuned frequency, designed to disrupt the signals from the brain to the body's motor functions. It was the equivalent of a perfectly executed system interrupt command. The effect was instantaneous. The ferocious spinning ceased. The two Kibas, their jutsu dissolving, went completely limp in midair and collapsed onto the arena floor in a heap, their eyes rolled back, completely unconscious. Not a single scratch had been inflicted upon them. A profound, echoing silence filled the entire hall. Everyone stared, dumbfounded. The Genin, the Jonin, the Hokage himself. They had expected a messy, drawn-out brawl. What they had witnessed was a display of such absolute, effortless control that it bordered on the sublime. "Winner, Naruto Uzumaki," Hayate announced, his own shock evident in his voice. Naruto walked calmly back towards the viewing platform, his expression unchanged. As he ascended the stairs, he passed by Hinata Hyuga, who was trembling, her face pale with fear. Her match was next, against her cousin, the formidable Neji. He paused beside her. The old Naruto would have shouted some loud, clumsy encouragement. The new Naruto simply looked at her, his perceptive gaze seeing past her fear to the gentle but resilient soul beneath. "Your soul is gentle, Hinata," he said, his voice quiet enough for only her to hear. "But it is not weak. It possesses a strength that even you do not yet understand. Do not let his words or his eyes define your worth. Your path is your own." He didn't wait for a reply. He continued up the stairs, leaving Hinata staring after him, his words echoing in her mind. It was not a pep talk. It was a validation. He had looked at her and seen not a failure, but a strength she had always been told was a weakness. For the first time, a flicker of genuine resolve ignited in her heart. Naruto watched the subsequent matches with a detached, analytical focus. He watched the brutal, terrifying efficiency with which Gaara defeated Rock Lee, feeling the bloodthirsty glee of the tailed beast stirring within the Sand Nin's soul. He watched Neji's match against Hinata, a cruel, one-sided affair. He didn't focus on the physical blows. He focused on the words. Neji's philosophy of a predetermined fate, of inescapable destiny, washed over the arena. Naruto perceived the deep, genuine pain at the core of Neji's belief, but he also saw the arrogance, the way Neji used this philosophy as both a shield for his own suffering and a weapon against others. As he watched, Naruto focused his perception, not on Neji himself, but on the faint, dark green swastika-like symbol barely visible on his forehead. He saw the caged bird seal. And he saw it for what it was. It was a masterpiece of cruel ingenuity. It wasn't just a brand that could be activated to cause pain. It was a parasitic web of chakra, woven directly into the soul's primary anchor point to the brain. Its tendrils were wrapped around the neural pathways that governed independent thought and rebellion. It was a spiritual lock, a slave collar designed not just to control the body, but to enforce a specific, fatalistic mindset. It was a tool to ensure the Branch family never forgot their place. Neji's philosophy wasn't just a belief. It was a symptom of his enslavement. After the match, as medics carried Hinata away and Neji walked back towards the platform with a cold, arrogant satisfaction, Naruto moved to intercept him. He stepped out from the crowd, blocking Neji's path in a secluded corridor. "Get out of my way, failure," Neji sneered, not even bothering to look at him properly. "The match is over. A loser like you has no business speaking to me. Fate is a comfortable prison, isn't it?" Naruto asked, his voice calm and even, stopping Neji in his tracks. "It allows you to blame the system for your weakness. To believe your powerlessness is a noble burden rather than a choice." Neji turned, his Byakugan eyes flaring with anger. "You know nothing. You cannot comprehend the inescapable destiny of the Hyuga branch house. The seal on my forehead is proof that some are born to be caged birds." "I know the seal," Naruto replied, his voice dropping to a near whisper that echoed in the stone hallway. "I see it more clearly than even your own eyes can. It is not merely a curse mark. It is a parasitic cage of chakra, woven with malicious precision into the nexus where your soul anchors to your brain. Its purpose is to hijack your pain receptors and disrupt the neurological pathways of your frontal lobe. It is designed to enforce servitude by making rebellion synonymous with agony." Neji staggered back, his face paling, his arrogant composure shattering like glass. No one had ever described the seal in such horrific, intimate detail. "You speak of fate because the seal forces you to," Naruto continued. His eyes filled with a clinical pity. "It conditions you to believe you have no choice. But that is the lie you have chosen to accept. The bars of your cage are not on your forehead, Neji. They are in your mind. You have mistaken your prison for the entire world. Hinata is not trapped by fate. You are." Naruto turned and walked away, leaving Neji standing alone in the corridor, his entire worldview fractured. The words had struck him with more force than any gentle fist strike, attacking the very foundation of his identity. The preliminary matches concluded. The finalists were announced. As the crowd began to disperse, Naruto's senses sought out one person in particular. He found her in a dark, secluded alcove, away from the prying eyes of the other Jonin. Anko was leaning heavily against the stone wall, her face beaded with sweat, her hand clamped over the cursed seal on her neck. Her usual manic energy was gone, replaced by a raw, painful vulnerability. The Proximi, tied to Orochimaru in the forest, had activated the parasitic fragment, and it was now throbbing with a phantom agony. Naruto approached her silently. She heard his footsteps and looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and her usual defiance. "What do you want, brat? Come to gloat. The pain is from the resonance, isn't it?" Naruto asked, his voice soft. His chakra was in the forest. The fragment of his soul he left inside you was reacting to the memory of its origin. Anko's breath hitched. Her tough facade crumbled in the face of his impossible perception. How could you know that?" she whispered, her voice strained. "Because I don't see a curse mark," Naruto said, taking a step closer. He looked at the seal not with fear or disgust, but with the focused gaze of a surgeon examining a tumor. "I see a parasite, a spiritual cancer feeding on your chakra, tethered to your soul. It's why you push everyone away with that wild personality. It's a defense mechanism, to keep Nay from getting close enough to see how much pain you're really in." Tears welled in Anko's eyes, a rare and shocking sight. He saw her, truly saw her, in a way no one else ever had. He saw past the bravado to the terrified, tortured girl she had been, the student left behind by a monster. He stopped just before her. His next words were quiet, but they carried the weight of a cosmic promise. It's not a jutsu that can be merely suppressed. It must be excised, completely. He looked her directly in the eyes, his own gaze clear, steady, and filled with an unshakable certainty. I can remove it, permanently. Anko stared at him, her breath caught in her throat. He was offering her the one thing she had long since abandoned all hope for. Freedom. The word itself was so alien, so impossible, that her mind could barely grasp it. But the way he spoke, the absolute authority in his voice, the impossible things she had already seen him do, a tiny, terrified flicker of hope ignited in the deepest, darkest part of her soul. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Forge of a Soul. The month granted to the finalists before the third stage of the exams was, for most, a time of frantic, desperate training. It was a month of honing jutsu, refining strategies, and pushing their physical limits to the breaking point. For Naruto, it was a month of quiet consolidation. But his first order of business was not his own power. It was a promise he had made in a shadowed corridor. 2 days after the preliminaries, Anko found him. She appeared before him at a secluded training ground as the sun was setting, casting long, melancholic shadows. Her usual manic energy was a carefully constructed mask, and beneath it, Naruto could perceive the turbulent storm of fear, doubt, and a desperate, agonizing hope. She had wrestled with his offer for 48 sleepless hours. The idea was insane, impossible. But the memory of his eyes, the absolute certainty in his voice, and the quiet, effortless power he had ice played in the arena had worn down her cynicism. You were serious, she said, her voice tight. It wasn't a question. I do not make idle promises, Naruto replied, his gaze steady. Especially not about something as important as a person's soul. Anko ran a trembling hand over the cursed seal. It throbbed with a dull, familiar ache. What do you want in return? My loyalty. To be your weapon. Everyone wants something. The words were laced with the bitterness of a life spent as a tool for others. I want you to be free, Naruto said simply. A person's soul should belong to them and them alone. That is all. His answer disarmed her completely. There was no angle, no hidden motive he was trying to conceal. His desire was genuine, and in its purity, it was more shocking than any demand would have been. She let out a shaky breath, the last of her defenses crumbling. Okay, brat, I'm in. What do we do? Do I need to get strapped to a table or something? Naruto gave a small, sad smile. Nothing like that, but we cannot do this here. We need a place that is clean. A place with no echoes of this world, no distractions, no possibility of interruption. He led her to the very center of the training ground. Stand close to me, he instructed, and try not to be alarmed. The world is about to feel wrong for a moment. Anko watched, her heart pounding, as Naruto held out his hand, palm up. He closed his eyes, and she felt a sudden, drastic shift in the air around them. It wasn't a jutsu she could recognize. There were no hand signs, no buildup of chakra. It was an act of pure will. From the monolith of Arceus within his soul, he drew upon the fundamental logic of creation, of space-time itself. Reality began to peel back. From Anko's perspective, the familiar trees and sky of training ground seemed to lose their color, becoming a gray, two-dimensional backdrop. Then, the backdrop itself tore, revealing a canvas of pure, silent, star-dusted blackness beneath. A profound vertigo washed over her. For a terrifying instant, she felt like she was standing on the edge of nothingness. Then, he began to paint. A floor of smooth, obsidian-like material spread out from their feet, stretching into an infinite, placid sea under their shared gaze. Above them, the blackness was populated by a swirl of unfamiliar constellations, their light a gentle, silver blue. The air became still, calm, and held a neutral temperature, neither warm nor cold. There was no sun, no moon, only the soft, ambient light of the silent stars. They were standing on a small, circular island in the middle of a cosmic ocean. Anko stared, her mouth agape, her mind struggling to comprehend the sheer, casual godhood of the act. He hadn't teleported them. He had unmade a piece of the world and built a new one in its place. What is this place? She stammered. It is a sanctuary, Naruto said, his voice echoing slightly in the profound silence. A pocket dimension. My own little corner of reality where we will not be disturbed. Here, we can begin. He gestured for her to sit. They sat cross-legged, facing each other on the smooth, cool surface of the island. The gravity of the situation returned, chasing away her awe. Fear began to creep back in. I will not lie to you, Anko, Naruto began, his expression serious. This will be difficult. It will be painful. The parasite has been a part of you for more than a decade. Its roots are deep. To remove it, I must create a bridge between our consciousnesses. I must enter your soulscape, the inner world that represents your mind and spirit. He paused, letting her absorb the information. Once inside, I will have to find the core of the parasite and sever its connection to you. But it will fight back. It will use your own memories, your own trauma, as a weapon against both of us. You will have to be a willing participant. You must face those memories, and when the time comes, you must consciously, actively reject the parasite with your own will. I can be the surgeon, but you must hold still on the operating table. Do you understand? She swallowed hard, her throat dry. Face her trauma, face him. The thought was terrifying. The alternative was a lifetime of this slow-acting poison, a lifetime of being his discarded toy. She looked at Naruto, at the calm strength in his eyes, and found a courage she didn't know she possessed. She gave a single, firm nod. Good, Naruto said. He raised his hands and placed them gently on her shoulders. His touch was warm, steady. Close your eyes, empty your mind, I will guide you. Anko did as he said. She felt his chakra, a warm, pure, golden energy, seep into her. It wasn't invasive, it was a gentle, inquiring presence. She felt a strange, tingling sensation at the base of her skull, and then the feeling of falling. Her consciousness detached from her physical body, and for a moment, she was adrift in a warm, comfortable darkness. Then, the new world resolved around her. And it was a nightmare. She was standing in a twisted, grotesque version of the forest of death. The trees were gnarled, skeletal things, weeping a thick, black sap that sizzled where it hit the ground. The air was cold and smelled of fear and decay. The ground was a sucking marsh, and she could see pale, shadowy hands reaching up from the mud. Whispers slithered through the dead trees, the silky, mocking voice of Orochimaru echoing all around her. Useless, weak, a failed experiment, you were nothing but a container. She cried out in terror, but Naruto's presence was suddenly beside her, not in a physical form, but as a pillar of warm, golden light. His voice echoed in her mind, calm and reassuring. I am here, Anko. This is just a memory. A shadow. It cannot harm you. These are the defenses of the parasite. She looked around and saw it. In the center of the nightmarish forest, dominating the landscape, was a colossal, dead tree. Wrapped around its trunk, pulsating with a venomous, purple-black energy, was the source of the infection. It looked like a cancerous growth, a spiritual tumor of unimaginable size, with thick, dark veins spreading out through the soil, poisoning the entire soulscape. That is the core, Naruto's voice explained. We have to get to it. To reach it, they had to walk through the landscape of her pain. With every step, a new memory rose from the swampy ground like a phantom. She saw herself as a child, an orphan, desperate for a father figure. She saw Orochimaru, his smile kind, his words promising her power and purpose. She felt the sting of the cursed seal as he bit her neck. The agonizing pain, the feeling of his foul chakra pouring into her. She relived the brutal experiments, the endless tests, the slow realization that he did not care for her at all. The final memory was the worst. She saw him standing before her, his eyes cold and dismissive. You are too weak for this power, Anko. You lack the ambition. You are a failure. And then he had turned and walked away, leaving her broken and alone in the forest, branded and discarded. The psychic pain of the memory was so intense she collapsed, her soul form flickering. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of her deepest insecurities. But Naruto's golden light flared, pushing them back. He stood before her, a shield against her own despair. He was wrong, Anko. Your kindness, your spirit, that is not weakness. It is a strength he could never understand because he has none of his own. Now, get up, we finish this, together. Leaning on his spiritual strength, she rose. They finally stood before the great, dead tree. As they approached, the cancerous growth pulsed violently, and a form coalesced from its dark energy. A giant, pale white snake, its eyes a cold, intelligent gold, slithered down the trunk. Its form a perfect psychic effigy of Orochimaru himself. You dare touch what is mine. The snake phantom hissed, its voice a venomous echo in their minds. She belongs to me. Her body, her chakra, her soul. She is my property. It is a psychic construct, Naruto projected to Anko. The last defense. It will try to break your will. The snake lunged, not at Naruto, but at Anko, ing through her and filling her mind with a wave of pure, undiluted terror and despair. She screamed, clutching her head as the full weight of her trauma bore down on her. Now, Anko, reject it, Naruto commanded. It is a parasite. It has no claim on you. Your soul is your own. Fight back. His voice was a lifeline in the sea of her pain. She thought of his promise. She thought of his simple, impossible desire for her to be free. A lifetime of anger, of rage at her master, of hatred for what he had done to her, coalesced into a single, defiant roar. Get out of my soul! She screamed, her own spiritual energy flaring with a brilliant, violet light. She pushed back against the snake's influence with all her might. The snake phantom recoiled, momentarily stunned by her defiance. It was the opening Naruto needed. His own soul form solidified. In his hand, a conceptual blade of pure, white light, forged from the Shinigami's authority over life and death, materialized. He lunged forward, not at the snake, but at the pulsating, cancerous growth on the tree. Insolent child, you cannot erase me. The snake shrieked as it shot towards him. Within my own soul, I commune with Kaguya Otsutsuki, Naruto's mental voice projected. Cold and absolute, I am guided by the authority of the Shinigami. I wield the logic of the being that created your universe. You are a broken fragment of a broken man. You are an error, and I am here to delete you. He swung the blade of light. It did not cut flesh, but spirit. He sliced through the dark, Venus tethers connecting the parasite to the tree of Anko's soul. Each cut sent a psychic shockwave through the soulscape. Anko felt a searing, tearing pain, as if a part of her was being ripped away, but beneath it was a profound sense of release. With a final, decisive strike, Naruto severed the last connection. The snake phantom let out a silent, echoing scream of pure agony and rage as its anchor was destroyed. It dissolved into black smoke, its whispers fading into nothingness. The massive, cancerous growth on the tree cracked, shattered, and turned to dust, its poison finally purged. The soulscape shuddered. The dead trees crumbled away. The black, grasping marsh receded. The oppressive darkness began to lift, replaced by a fragile, gray twilight. The healing had begun. Naruto's form pulsed with Kaguya's gentle, life-giving energy, which flowed into the wound on the soul tree, cleansing it and sealing it with a soft, warm light. Their consciousnesses snapped back to their physical bodies. Anko's eyes flew open. She gasped, a deep, shuddering breath, as if she had been underwater for an eternity. She was back on the calm, obsidian island in Naruto's pocket dimension. She was physically and emotionally drained, her body trembling with exhaustion. But something was different. Something was gone. The constant, low-level thrum of pain from her neck. The feeling of a foreign, malevolent presence coiled at the base of her skull. The iet whispers of inadequacy that had haunted her every waking moment. The spiritual weight she had carried for more than half her life. It was all gone. There was only quiet, a peaceful, clean silence in her own soul that she had never known. She slowly, tentatively, raised a hand to her neck. She touched the spot where the cursed seal had been. Naruto watched as the three black tomo, the physical manifestation of the spiritual brand, began to flake away, turning into a fine, gray ash that was carried away on a non-existent breeze. Beneath it was smooth, clean, unblemished skin. The reality of it washed over her. He had done it. The impossible promise. He had set her free. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. Then another. The dam of her carefully constructed emotional fortitude, wall she had built to survive a decade of torment, finally broke. She collapsed forward, not in pain, but in a storm of overwhelming, cathartic relief, and sobbed. She wept for the little girl who had been abandoned, for the student who had been branded a failure, and for the woman who, for the first time, was truly whole. Naruto didn't speak. He didn't move to comfort her in a conventional way. He simply sat there, his presence a quiet, steadfast pillar of support, letting her release the years of pent-up pain. He had been her surgeon and her shield. Now, he was her witness. As they sat in the profound silence of his self-made world, a soft light began to glow on the horizon of the cosmic sea. A new dawn was breaking, its gentle rays illuminating the tear-streaked face of a woman who had just been reborn. And in that shared, sacred space, a bond was forged between them, not of romance or of friendship, but of a shared spiritual intimacy deeper and stronger than either. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. Invasion and Intersection. The roar of the crowd was a living thing, a tidal wave of sound that washed over the massive arena. Tens of thousands of spectators, civilians, foreign dignitaries, and shinobi from every nation, filled the stands under a brilliant, cloudless sky. The air was electric with anticipation, smelling of roasted chestnuts, dust, and the sharp, collective excitement of a crowd hungry for a spectacle. Hidden amongst the foreign merchants in the upper stands, Cynthia felt like an anthropologist observing the rituals of a lost tribe. For the past week, she had loosely studied this village from the shadows, and now, she was at the heart of its most celebrated event. A small, discreet device disguised as a brooch on her black coat was passively scanning the ambient energy signatures, feeding data to her Pokémon. The ambient chakra was dense here, a sea of countless small lights. But there were larger, brighter flames as well, the 4 cage in the VIP box, each radiating power like a small sun. Then, the finalists were introduced. They walked out onto the arena floor, a collection of the most promising young talent in the generations. Her scanner analyzed each one. The boy from the Sand Village, Gaara, was a terrifying void, his energy signature a maelstrom of instability and bloodlust. The Uchiha boy was a sharp, focused flame of intense, disciplined chakra. And then there was him, Naruto Uzumaki. The moment he stepped into the arena, the brooch on her coat emitted a low, urgent hum. The readings on her Pokémon spiked so violently the scale had to recalibrate itself. It was him, the source, the epicenter. Yet, to look at him, he was the calmest person in the stadium. He walked with a quiet, easy confidence, his posture relaxed, his expression serene. The cosmic, world-shaking power she had felt from another dimension was coiled inside that small frame, held in a state of perfect, placid equilibrium. He was a walking paradox, a thermonuclear reactor disguised as a boy. The first match was announced, a digital board flashing the names, Neji Hyuga vs. Naruto Uzumaki. A murmur went through the crowd. The Hyuga prodigy versus the dead last. Most considered the outcome a foregone conclusion. Down on the field, Neji faced Naruto, his Byakugan already activated, the veins around his eyes bulging. But the cold, arrogant certainty he had once possessed was gone. Replaced by a flicker of doubt, a seed planted in a corridor a month ago. "So we meet, failure," Neji said, his voice loud enough for the front rows to hear. "Your luck has brought you here. But destiny dictates this is where your journey ends. A person's fate is decided at the moment of their birth. You cannot escape yours." Naruto simply looked at him, his gaze filled not with anger, but with a profound sadness. "You are still trapped in that cage, Neji." He took a deep breath, and then his voice rose, not in a shout, but in a clear, resonant tone amplified by a subtle manipulation of the air itself. Carrying his words to every corner of the stadium. "People of Konoha, you have come here today to watch us fight for the rank of Chunin. But first, you will hear a truth about one of this village's most noble clans." A shocked silence began to fall over the crowd. In the stands, the Hyuga clan elders stiffened, their faces turning to stone. Hiyashi Hyuga, the clan head, narrowed his pale eyes. "Neji Hyuga believes in an absolute fate," Naruto continued, his voice echoing. "He believes that the main house is destined for greatness, and the branch house, the family he belongs to, is destined for servitude. He believes this because of the mark on his forehead, the Hyuga caged bird seal." Neji flinched as if struck. "Silence. You know nothing of my burden." "I know it is not a burden of fate," Naruto countered, his voice ringing with authority. "It is a tool of control. You call it fate, Neji, but the main house of your clan calls it subjugation. The C.L. on your forehead is not a symbol of destiny. It is a brand of slavery." Gasps rippled through the stadium. This was not a pre-match taunt. It was a direct, political assault on the internal policies of the most powerful clan in Konoha. "It is a parasitic jutsu. Naruto declared, his eyes locked on Neji's horrified face, designed to give the main house the power to destroy a branch house member's brain cells with a simple hand sign. It ensures loyalty not through respect, but through terror. That is not fate, Neji. That is tyranny. Neji, his face pale with a mixture of fury and shame, finally snapped. I will seal your mouth myself. He shot forward, his hands poised in the iconic gentle fist stance. 8 trigrams 64 palms. He moved like a phantom, a whirlwind of precise, deadly strikes aimed at Naruto's tenketsu. His chakra points. But Naruto was no longer there. He moved with a liquid grace, evading each strike with minimal effort. To his perception, Neji's movements were a broadcasted message. He could feel the intent, the flow of chakra, the tensing of muscles an instant before the action occurred. It was like watching a play for which he had already read the script. You cannot escape, Neji roared, his attack growing more frantic. You are the one who cannot escape, Naruto replied calmly, weaving through the storm of strikes. You are so blinded by the cage on your forehead that you have built a bigger one around your heart. You lash out at Hinata, at me, at everyone, because you are terrified of admitting the truth, that you are not bound by fate, but you are too afraid to choose freedom. With a final, desperate surge, Neji aimed a 2-fingered strike at Naruto's heart. This time, Naruto didn't evade. He moved inside the attack, his own hand coming up to meet Neji's. But he didn't block, he simply placed the tips of his index and middle fingers directly on Neji's attacking hand. A soft, golden pulse of chakra flowed from Naruto's fingers into Neji. It wasn't a destructive force. It was a precise, surgical injection of energy that traveled up Neji's arm and instantly, painlessly, sealed the 361 tenketsu points in his body. Neji's chakra flow stopped dead. His body went rigid, all the strength leaving him in an instant, and he collapsed to his knees, utterly powerless, staring up in disbelief. Naruto had defeated a master of the gentle East by perfectly executing its ultimate purpose, without ever learning the style itself. The only destiny that matters, Naruto said to the kneeling prodigy, his voice returning to a normal, quiet tone, is the one you make for yourself. The cage is unlocked when you choose for it to be. The referee, stunned, finally found his voice. Winner, Naruto Uzumaki. As the crowd sat in a state of shocked silence, processing the ideological and physical dismantling they had just witnessed, the air began to shift. A few soft, white feathers began to drift down from the sky. An illusion. Cynthia, in the stands, felt nothing. The genjutsu was a manipulation of chakra networks, and she possessed none. For her, the world did not go to sleep. It erupted. Explosions rocked the stadium walls. Shinobi Fr. The sand and sound villages suddenly appeared throughout the crowd, kunai flashing. The festive roar of the audience turned into a symphony of screams. In the cage box, the cage revealed himself to be Orochimaru, trapping the third Hokage in a shimmering purple barrier on the arena rooftop. The invasion had begun. While the Konoha shinobi leapt into action, engaging the invaders in pockets of frantic combat, Naruto's attention immediately shifted. His senses flared out, assessing the largest threats. He felt the colossal chakra signature of a giant snake being summoned in the eastern sector, directly above a stand filled with panicking civilians. His priority was absolute protection. He leapt from the arena floor to the top of the stadium wall in a single, effortless bound. He sent his palm forward towards the descending monster. Stand, he commanded, channeling the creative logic of Arceus. The air in front of the spectator stand shimmered. With a sound like a mountain being born, a 50-foot-tall, 100-foot-wide wall of flawless, transparent crystal erupted from the ground. It was not ice, not glass, but a material as hard as diamond. The giant snake, its maw wide, slammed into the barrier with a deafening, sickening crack. The wall didn't even vibrate. The civilians behind it, who had been moments from being crushed, stared in wide-eyed, terrified awe through the crystalline shield at the thwarted beast. At the same moment, on the other side of the arena, Cynthia was already moving. Her champion instincts had taken over the instant the first explosion sounded. She saw another giant snake, summoned by a different sand ninja, rearing back to smash the wing of the Konoha hospital just beyond the stadium walls. There are injured in there. she yelled, though no one was listening. Her duty was clear. She reached for her belt. Garchomp, let's go. With a flash of red light, her partner materialized, its powerful roar cutting through the din of battle. The hulking dragon was a sight so alien it caused both friend and foe to pause for a stunned second. Garchomp, target the serpent. Dragon rush, Cynthia commanded, pointing a decisive finger. Garchomp was a blur of blue and red. It shot across the arena like a land-based missile, wreathed in an aura of brilliant, draconic energy. It slammed into the giant snake's midsection with the force of a meteor strike. The summons, for all its size, was lifted off its feet and thrown back, crashing into the stadium wall with a shriek of pain before dissolving into a cloud of smoke. The display of raw, on-chakra-based power was so shocking that it created a momentary lull in the fighting. It was in this lull that Naruto, having perceived this strange and potent energy signature, turned. His eyes scanned the chaos and landed on the woman in the black coat, standing beside her formidable dragon-like creature. Their eyes met across the ruined arena. It was a moment of profound, silent communication. He saw in her a calm intelligence, a strategic mind, and an aura of command that was completely out of place. She saw in him the calm, controlled epicenter of the impossible power she had crossed dimensions to find. They were two poles of immense competence in a sea of chaos. Naruto leapt from his perch, landing softly on the ground not 10 feet from her. Sand and Sound Ninja, recovering from their shock, saw a new target and began to converge on their position. "You're not from around here," Naruto stated, his voice calm. He didn't raise his hands to fight, but the very ground around them seemed to listen to him. A wave of earth rose from the stadium floor, intercepting a volley of incoming kunai with a dull thud. "My name is Cynthia. I'm a researcher," she replied, her voice equally steady, as if they were meeting at an academic conference and not in the middle of a war zone. The sheer absurdity of the situation was not lost on her. "Garchomp, Stone Edge," her partner roared, slamming its claws into the ground. A circle of razor-sharp, glowing stones erupted from the earth, shooting outward and scattering the first wave of attackers. They stood back to back, a nascent alliance forged in the heart of battle. "Your partner is powerful," Naruto said, glancing at Garchomp with analytical appreciation. He perceived its life force, a proud, loyal, and incredibly strong spirit. "He is the very best," Cynthia replied with a hint of a smile. "And you are the reason I am here." Before Naruto could ask what she meant, a new threat emerged. Gaara of the Sand, his body partially transformed, his mind clearly gone, was being led away by his siblings. Sasuke, seeing a chance to prove himself, recklessly leapt down in pursuit. Naruto felt the unstable, explosive energy of Gaara's soul moving away from the main battle. He looked at the chaos around him, at the barrier protecting the Hokage, at the new, mysterious champion at his side, and at the path his teammate had just taken. His responsibilities were layered, complex. The old Naruto would have chased Sasuke without a second thought. The new Naruto saw the bigger picture. Protect the village, end the invasion, deal with the other Jinchuriki, and figure out who this incredible, impossible woman was. "We need to stop this invasion at its source," he said to Cynthia, his voice cutting through the noise. "Can you and your partner handle crowd control on this side?" "We can," she confirmed, her eyes sharp and focused. "What are you going to do?" "Something that should have been done a long time ago," Naruto replied. He looked up at the purple barrier where his village's leader was trapped, and then towards the path Gaara had taken. He would have to be in two places at once. Fortunately for him, that was no longer a problem. Chapter 8 End. The end. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.